Welcome everybody. My name is Jeff McGinnis. I'm the National Beverage Director for the WineStyles family of stores. Very excited for everyone to be joining us tonight across all of our locations for another one of our Winery Spotlight programs. As you are all aware, we continued this program through COVID. We went largely 100% virtual, where a lot of our stores, you'd come in, pick up the samples, taste at home. But it presented a great opportunity for us to not go back 100% in person, but this allows us to, one, have you in our stores, taste, try, enjoy the wines with us, but more importantly, connect virtually with the folks that know a lot more about the wines than we do. So with no further, I'm going to introduce one of our special guests, and he's going to introduce our next special guest, and we were going to get to start tasting wines. The first person I want to introduce, his name is Travis Vernon. He is with Well Crafted Beverages. He's a handsome gentleman waving at us right there. So Travis has been a partner of ours, I want to say about 2 or 3 years now. For a lot of our wine club programs, we've done winery spotlights with them. It's just a great partner, a great source for some of the amazing wines that we program across all of our stores. And so he's got a great book of different wineries. He is very discerning in what he chooses to bring in for us, as well as for his own company. And he was kind enough to introduce us to the winery that we will be tasting tonight. A little bit of a backstory behind this winery as well. Travis has got a great relationship with our store in Montclair. Arthur, who's a great, wonderful guy. Arthur said, "Hey, have you ever done this winery? I do it every single year. It's one of my largest events every year. We love to have them out. We sell their wines. Our customers love their wines." And I'm like, "Arthur, you hadn't yet. Hello." So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Travis here. He's going to say hi, maybe tell us a little bit about his company, and then introduce our special guest, and we will start tasting and trying some wines.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, just making sure I'm not on mute. So my name is Travis Vernon. I'm based in Virginia. And as Jeff said, I'm right down the street from a WineStyles here. When we started our company, in fact, I think the second order that we had back in 2010 was Arthur Lampros at WineStyles. And we've been working with WineStyles ever since. We started our company to focus on small family producers. And we work with wineries that make anywhere from 500 to 1,000 cases to about 50,000 cases, and we really focus in on those small estate producers that have a philosophy of making wine really in the vineyard rather than in the winery. And so our best partnerships are with wineries with that type of philosophy. Right now, we work with about 100 small producers from all around the globe. And our #1 selling producer has been with us for about 8 years, and that's Remhoogte. I was lucky enough to stumble into Chris, who's on the call with us and is the winemaker and strategist behind Remhoogte, and his brother at a tasting in Cape Town. And at that point in time, they were with a really large distributor. I think they were with Republic National, or maybe it was Country Vintner in our market, but one of the really big guys. And it was kind of serendipitous that it was a misfit, because those very big distributors, they don't really focus on helping small estate wineries and family producers build their brands. What they do really well is to plant really large producers who are already developed, well-known, and in the market. And so what we've done with Remhoogte, and it's for us has been a pleasure in kind of building the market customer by customer, consumer by consumer, glass by glass, 2 a.m. Zoom tasting by 2 a.m. Zoom tasting. And so fortunately, you guys are going to get a much more interesting gentleman to introduce you to the property and all of the wines. It is, I believe, 2 a.m. there in South Africa, and it is harvest time over there in the Southern Hemisphere. So Chris was telling us right before we got on the call, you guys are going to taste a Riesling. He's going to then get up again in about 2 hours after this call and harvest the next vintage of that Riesling, which I think is really cool. So without further ado, thank you everybody for having us. And here's Chris from Remhoogte.
Great introduction. Thanks, Travis. And thanks, Jeff. Thank you, Julie, for putting it together. It's great to be with all you guys this evening. Yeah, I think we're going to dive straight into it, into the wines. But as Travis mentioned, we're an estate. So everything from vineyard to bottle, we do on the property. We are in Stellenbosch, so just outside Cape Town, so southwestern tip of Africa, so very proximal to the sea. We're surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean, which has a big impact on the wines we make. The South African wine industry began sort of just over 350 years ago. The first vineyards were planted in South Africa in the late 1650s. So we're quite an old industry as far as wine goes. So there is a lot of history in our industry. I think that's something that not too many people know, obviously because of apartheid and a bit of our history. We've had very limited access to international markets, which all changed in 1994 when Nelson Mandela came in. And our farm, Remhoogte, has been going, or we still have the original title deeds from 1812, so just over 200 years. And the name Remhoogte is Dutch. So obviously the Dutch were the first people to colonize the Cape. And our farm is basically we're on the last steep sort of slope down into the town of Stellenbosch. And there was a pass that goes down our farm, and they called it Remhoogte, which the literal translation, Rem are the brakes, like the brakes in a car, and Hoogte are heights. So it was Brake Heights was the name of the pass, because the ox wagons used to have to engage their brakes coming down the hill. So that's where the name comes from. So the farm was named after the pass that comes down it. And what used to be a big problem for ox wagons is now really great for wine. These nice steep south-facing slopes, which really expose us to the breezes off the sea, and keep the vineyards nice and cool in summer. And so I'm going to kick straight off with the wines, if that's okay. I think we're starting with, I think what is probably South Africa's most planted white varietal, and most planted varietal overall. And it's Chenin Blanc. So Chenin was originally planted in South Africa in big plantings in the mid sort of 1950s, 1960s, and they planted it for making rebate wine. So it gave very big yields. So they planted it for basically making brandies. And what's happened is these vineyards have got older and older, and as they've got older, the wines have just got better and better, yields dropping. So we've got one vineyard of Chenin on the farm. So we do 2 Chenins from one block. It's 2 hectares. So I think that's about 4 or 5 acres. And it's planted in 1987. So it's not ancient, but it's old enough to really, to be well balanced, just give us consistently good quality year in and year out. But one of the things with old vines is, when vines are young, everything kind of starts in a line and really neat. And as they get older, we call them candles, but each year when you prune, you get these big sort of arms developing, and you end up with a very wide canopy. And because of that, you have some bunches that are really exposed and that hang outside the canopy. And then you have bunches that are more shaded and hang inside the canopy. And we do 2 separate picks. So our first pick is all the exposed bunches, which is the second Chenin we'll take. And then the Chenin and then the Chenin that you have in your glasses is our first light. So that's the second pick, and that's all the shaded bunches. And because they're shaded, out of the sun, they tend to stay greener, maintain more acidity, and the flavor profile is a little more zesty. So like kind of limey, apricots, it's a really fresh flavor profile. But we pick that, bring it into the cellar, no skin contact, basically press it straight away, and then go to stainless steel tanks, ferment it, and then it usually has 4 to 5 months on the lees, and then racked and bottled. So made to really be fresh and just to a really drinkable, lighter style of Chenin Blanc. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that one. It's
Chris, the name First Light, where did you guys derive that from? Is that the vineyard that sees the first rays? Yes, exactly. So the First Light, one of the things, we're obviously opposite to you guys in the Northern Hemisphere, where, south facing for you guys is warmer. Us in the Southern Hemisphere, south facing is much cooler. And so we look for south facing sites.
And this vineyard faces southeast. So it basically faces the sun comes up over the Simonsberg mountain, which is just behind us or next to us. And the first sort of rays of light that hit vineyards, they hit this Chenin Blanc block. So it gets light early in the morning, and then because of the slope, it loses the afternoon sun, so it doesn't get baked, by the sun. So again, helping maintain that freshness. And then just as far as wines go as well, we do all spontaneous fermentation. So when we bring the grapes in, we don't add any sulfur. We do our ferments, all uninoculated. And then depending on the wine, we'll do the white wines are the only wines we do a light or a rough filter on. All the reds are unfined, unfiltered. So we really believe that wine is made in the vineyard, and what we get from the vineyard is what we want you to taste in the glass. So nothing added, nothing removed. And that's a little bit of our wine philosophy. If there are any questions or comments, you can, I suppose, put it on the chat.
Julie, we're going to the Honeybunch Chenin next. Is that correct?
All right. So the Honeybunch is, as I mentioned, it is the first pick that we do through this block. So I started working. I studied viticulture and enology at Stellenbosch University, and then went and spent a few years traveling. So I worked in West Australia and Margaret River in the Napa Valley, and then in Bordeaux in Pomerol as well. And then when I came back in 2007, I started working with this vineyard. My dad never made white wines. He just did reds. And we had this one vineyard of Chenin, which he actually sold the grapes. So he wasn't really interested in making white wine. But when I started working with the block, I would always stage harvest it, purely because we have exposed bunches which ripen a little earlier, and then the shaded bunches which ripen a little later. I would make both components separately and then blend them together. And we did one Chenin Blanc. And then in 2010, I was tasting with actually one of my dad's friends, a winemaker from across the road. I always got him to come and taste through with me, just for some outside input after harvest. And we were tasting through these two batches of Chenin Blanc, and we got to the Honeybunch component, which I always fermented in barrel. And he said, you can't blend this away. You have to bottle this on its own. So that was in 2010. So this wine's been going for over 10 years. And we basically I get the team to go through and pick everything that is turned gold. So we basically, all the bunches that get more sunlight, they go this beautiful golden color, and develop a completely different flavor profile to what we have in the inside bunches or the shaded bunches that go into the first light. With the exposed bunches as well, where this block is, we get quite a lot of dew in the evenings. So we do get a bit of botrytis developing as well. And because the bunches for the Honeybunch are exposed, that botrytis or that noble rot actually stays healthy. So we can use it in the wine. And I think that brings a really interesting sort of dynamic or aspect to the wine itself. So the 2020, which I think you guys have in your glasses, is we got about between 12 and 15% botrytized bunches. So bunches that basically, they dehydrate, get a little bit more, a little bit sweeter, but they bring a nice texture to the wine. But we basically pick all those bunches, bring it in. We usually finished harvesting. So we harvested over about 4 days, and we usually finished harvesting by about 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning. So it's nice and early. So the bunches are nice and cool. I then go into the press, and we do skin contact on this one. So where the first light is pressed straight away, no skin contact. The Honeybunch I leave on the skins for about 12 hours. So we usually have the press filled by 9 a.m. and then I come in after dinner in the evening and press the grapes. So I leave it on the skins just because we want to get some of they taste so good. And so I just want to get some of that flavor from the skins into the sort of the juice and the subsequent wine. And then once it's pressed, we go straight to barrels. So all French oak barrels and all smaller format barrels. So 225 liter. I'm not sure what that is in gallons, but fill the barrels, allow it to ferment. So again, spontaneous fermentation. And then once ferment's done, I top the barrels and leave them. So we literally, once we filled the barrels, we don't touch them again until we rack them or take the wine out of the barrels for bottling. So it spends a full year on the heavy lees and then racked and bottled. So a much more textured wine when you compare it to the First Light, but a great comparison. It's two wines from the same vineyard and just incredibly different. You know, they're kind of worlds apart in terms of style. So where the Honeybunch is, you know, a lot more layered, a little bit richer, the First Light is a lot more zesty and fresh. And hence the difference in closure, where the Honeybunch is under cork, the First Light is under Stelvin or screw cap.
Chris, can you orient us and just give us an idea of the production size that you have for the Honeybunch Chenin?
Yes, so that varies significantly depending on the year. So we generally find if we have much cooler years, we're much more limited in how much Honeybunch we can make. But I mean, the Honeybunch varies between 5 and 15,000 bottles. So in a good year, we can get a lot more. And then the First Light is pretty much the same size production. Obviously, if we get more Honeybunch, so we find if we get a lot more wind and it's a lot warmer, we have a lot more bunches exposed because our wind comes out the south and the rows face east-west. So it exposes all the morning sun side of the bunches. And if we have a windy, hot summer, we generally get a lot more Honeybunch, where, you know, the converse for the First Light, where if it's a much cooler summer, you know, we don't get as many bunches exposed and not as many that turn gold. So we get a little bit less Honeybunch and more First Light. But it's, yeah, between 5 and 15,000 bottles approximately.
Hey, Chris, you mentioned that your father wasn't making any whites. How did you convince him to go down that path, that it was the right thing to do?
Yeah, so we are a proper family business. So I do sort of winemaking and vines. My brother's the marketing and sales guy, and we're trying to get my dad to retire. But he started making wine so he wasn't a qualified winemaker. So we moved onto the farm in 1993. So our family, we used to live in Johannesburg, which is kind of more landlocked and sort of in central South Africa. And my dad made the first wines in 1994. So he always said that, you know, Bordeaux is what got him into wine, and specifically the right bank. So Merlot driven blends, and red was just his passion. And luckily we had this vineyard, and he was selling it to a friend that was making some amazing Chenins from it. But you know, making whites is very different to making reds. And the first year I made, I just kept 3 rows, so a very small portion of the block. And we made a little bit, then, you know, it did quite well. We got some nice wines from it, and then kept the full block the next year. So it didn't take too much convincing, I must say. He was very open to me kind of doing my own thing. And it's sort of grown from there. So yeah, we've actually planted a little bit more Chenin at the end of last year, but I'll be in my 70s by the time it's giving us the quality that we're getting from the Honeybunch block. So that'll be the Chenin that we've planted now. We'll use a little more in First Light, obviously, until it we hit sort of 15-20 years old, when it starts giving us the kind of depth and quality that we get in Honeybunch. But my dad was, I must say, he's been really good about kind of handing over and letting me sort of do my own thing.
Are we ready for the next one? I know I usually get texts from my brother to say, slow down, we're going too fast, but I think we're good for the next wine.
Okay, great. So the next one is a so Remhoogte, you know, my dad, so although the farm's been growing grapes since the beginning, so since 1812 when it was first kind of demarcated and handed over. And the first wines were, as I mentioned, were made by my dad in 1994. So a lot of South Africa, it was predominantly growers, especially in like sort of in with the previous government, you know, everything was sort of state controlled and there weren't many small independent producers. So when we moved down, that was when everything kind of changed and we started producing. With, you know, having made wines since 1994 and with my dad having started, especially with the Remhoogte range, we've got to be consistent in what we do and got to be consistent sort of year on year. People kind of know what to expect. So I as a winemaker can't deviate too far from what my dad was doing, which is great. I mean, we do obviously do tweak things, but to keep it interesting in the cellar in 2015, I managed to convince my dad and then my brother, who's the marketing and sales guy, to allow me to experiment with some different varietals and techniques, and that's where we started the free-to-be range. So the idea behind this range is purely, as I mentioned, to allow me to sort of try different varietals, different winemaking techniques, stuff that I can't do in Remhoogte yet. If we find something that works, we will incorporate it, which we have in some wines, which I'll explain a little later. Some of the other wines we're going to taste. But the next wine is a Weißer Riesling. So it's obviously a German and Germany and Alsace are known for Rieslings, and this is the German sort of clone of Riesling, and it's from a vineyard next door, sort of on our top border, so on the mountain above us, and it was actually owned. So it was on a property that was owned by Distel, which is a big cooperative cellar. And because it was a cooperative cellar, they had everything planted. So I always said I'm never going to plant Riesling in South Africa because I love the European Rieslings, and it's not something I think we can't do what they do. But our neighbor bought this block from this property and bought the farm. There was this one block, and it's 0.8 of a hectare. So I mean, I think just over an acre in size. So no, 2 acres. So it's very small and just an incredibly unique site. It's all on shale. It's at about 400 meters above sea level, so over 1,000 feet, and just a really unique site. So Riesling isn't something we would have planted, but something that I was really excited to work with. So we saw this. I always looked at the vineyard and thought it looked amazing, and then saw it was just going to waste. There were weeds. It was just being left, and it was overgrown. So I actually phoned him and said, look, what is his plan with the block? And he said, no, he's not interested in making wine. I can have the vineyard as long as I give him a few bottles of wine every year. So I took over the vineyard in 2018. 2019 was our first vintage. And then I think you guys will have the 2020, Travis? Just under correction. I just want to confirm, because we are on the 2021 here at the farm. But anyway, so it's a vineyard we basically harvested early in the morning. We're harvesting the 2022 in about 2.5 hours we'll start. So it's a beautiful site, and I basically pick it. We bring it into the cellar, press it straight away. Also fermented in stainless to try and keep it as fresh and zesty as possible. And then as soon as fermentation's done, I rack it and bottle it. So it's got no time on the lees. We don't want it to kind of round or sort of fatten up. We want to kind of keep it really limey and zesty. And that is the free-to-be Riesling. And then just on the free-to-bees, one of my briefs from my brother when we started, when I said I wanted to do this, was that if nobody buys it, I've got to drink it all. So we obviously very limited in how much we can make. I can't drink more than sort of, well, this one's grown a lot, but initially it was sort of 600 bottles was my limit on production on these. But a really fun, interesting range of wines. And then again, obviously limited production. Where Remhoogte is all estate. So from vineyard to bottle, we do on the property itself. The free to be is not necessarily estate. So although the Weißer Riesling is on a different property, I still farm it myself. So I still have full control of it, but it isn't certified as an estate wine. And that is the Riesling. So I hope a dry style of Riesling. So you can't really compare it to what they do in Europe. We don't get the acidities that they get, so we can't work with residual sugar like they do. Often, the German and Alsatian Rieslings, especially the higher tier quality wise or higher tiers, have a lot more residual sugar. So we ferment it dry, and I think it's a good new world take on Weißer Riesling.
One of the questions we often get, and I'm sure it'll pop up, or it's probably popped up in a couple of the stores, is kind of the ageability, of some of these white wines. There's always a misconception that white wines can't age, and Riesling is one of those that I think is clearly misunderstood for many reasons. But kind of what is the ageability of these, and what would be your suggestion or sweet spot for if somebody wanted to take any of these and lay them down for a bit and then taste and try them?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first light that we started with is made to drink younger. So it's not quite in the same. I think although I love it and it's a great wine, it is made to drink younger. So 2 to 3 years, it definitely improves a little bit. We bottle it kind of about 8 months after harvesting, and sort of about 4 months after that, it really starts opening up. The Honeybunch we've been making since 2010, and the 2010 is still drinking beautifully. So the flavor profile obviously changes as the wine ages, but it's definitely, I've bottled Honeybunch for all of my kids' birth years, going back to 2011 in magnums. So I'm going to lie those down and open those probably in another 10 or 15 years. So it should keep really well. So far, I don't have a back history with the wine, so I can't say with absolute certainty, but so far, the 2010s are still on their way up. So it's got enough depth and enough texture, to really make it age worthy. And then the Weißer Riesling, I've been working with this block for 3 years, so not as long, but we are seeing as it matures, like the 2019, the first vintage, it develops more and more of those kind of typical Riesling flavors. So now when they're young, you don't get a lot of that terpene, that sort of, it's not a nice flavor profile, but that sort of burnt rubber, that typical Riesling character. And that's slowly developing now with age in bottle. So I think the Riesling, and it's also got the acidity to really carry it. So I think that'll age well as well. But it depends on the customers. I love drinking these young as well, especially also the Honeybunch. I think it changes, as it ages, it becomes more something you'll have on its own, where now, if I drink a 2020 Honeybunch, it's awesome with food, so it stands up to a lot of dishes, and it's really fun to pair food with. But the ageability I think on the last two are definitely way higher than what we started with on the first light.
Perfect. Yeah, I think customers in general are starting to understand, that white wine are a lot more ageable than what they think. Everybody just assumes Chardonnay, you lay down, everything else you drink. And Riesling is one that is clearly misunderstood for many reasons, whether it's sweet or dry, Alsatian style or German style. I mean, it's and I've poured a Riesling for somebody that swears to God they don't like Rieslings. What it is, because it's an Alsatian style Riesling, and they're like, this is the best thing I've ever had. So having styles in different regions is wonderful. I think I don't have any other questions. As we mentioned, if you have questions or your store has questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. We'll facilitate those as we go through, but we welcome those questions, comments, observations, thumbs up. This wine is the best thing I've ever had comments. Those are really well welcome. So I think we're ready for the next wine.
Okay, awesome. So now we're moving on to reds, and that's kind of where we started. It's what my dad did with the first whites only really being made in 2007. So I'm excited about the next two wines that we're tasting. I think they kind of sort of show the farm as its whole. I think one of the things that makes South Africa incredibly unique as a wine growing area is our incredible diversity in very small pockets. So because we're so mountainous, and with the different aspects and exposure to the sea and the influence that the sea has on our vineyards, you've got just this, you can have a block 10 meters away from another one, but it's on a different side of the slope and you get a completely different wine. So that's where we began. My dad made single varietals, so a Merlot, Pinotage, and Cabernet Sauvignon up until 2000, and then began doing blends. So the next two wines we're tasting are both blends. They began in 2002. It was the first year we started making each of these blends, and the idea with both of them, more so in the second blend, but is that we want to make wines that kind of showcase the farm in its entirety. So where, Weiss Riesling, First Light, Honeybunch, we'll taste the Pinotage a little later, and then the Sir Thomas Cullinan, they're all incredibly site specific from specific vineyard parcels. These two are from basically blocks as sort of spread over the estate itself. So the estate is, we've got about just over 30 hectares under vineyards. So I think I just sort of double it, but I think it's a little bit more. So it's maybe like 70 or 80 acres of vineyards. And so with blends, I can use sort of parcels from all the different blocks. So the first blend that we're tasting is our Soaring Eagle. When my dad first looked at this property and ended up buying it, there was a pair of black eagles, which are Africa's largest eagle. They were nesting in the mountain just above us. And he saw them flying over, and he loves wildlife and birds and things like that. So he took it as a sign that he must, put an offer in on this property. And we ended up buying, and we still see the birds flying around the vineyards, to this day. And they are a big part of our vermin control. So we've got raptor posts in the blocks, and they keep sort of rats and mice and stuff under control. And that's where the name comes from, the Soaring Eagle that we see flying over. And for this red, we basically, I use majority of the wine is from younger vines. So the vines are between 4 and 12 years old. And because of that, you don't get quite the same intensity and concentration that we do from some of the older vines. So you have to treat the grapes a little bit differently. So for this one, I think you guys have got the 2019. It's a Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Shiraz blend, almost even percentages of each. I pick and vinify everything separately, and then we make up the blend after a year, go back to barrel for another year, and then racked and bottled. So it has 24 months in barrel. Again, being from younger vines and slightly lighter, slightly lighter reds, or the sort of, we don't get as much concentration. It can't handle too much new oak. So this is actually all second, third, and fourth fill barrels. So no new oak on this wine, and made to be really drunk a little younger. We love, in South Africa, we barbecue a lot. We call it braaiing, but it's a kind of an institution, and it's what we do on weekends. So if we're socializing, we braai. And this wine we'll actually, even in summer, drink it a little bit chilled and have it with the braai. So it's it's a lighter, I say less serious style of red, but it's still a serious wine. You know, it's had 24 months in barrel and still a structured red, but just not quite as intense as some of the reds we're going to taste a little later. So that is the Soaring Eagle. And again, this one's under Stelvin. So also under screw cap, same as the First Light. And that's purely as a result of the style of the wine, you know, a little bit lighter, not made to, you know, it'll age probably 5 to 8 years pretty easily, but it's not made to last, 20 years. So I don't know, for the people at home, that's the Soaring Eagle.
We did have a couple comments and observations here to share for the group. Doug said, always on the hunt for a new Chenin Blanc. These two really offer something fresh and different for my palate. You know, obviously there's not tons of Chenin Blancs out there that you see outside of Vouvray in many stores. So, you know, having, South Africa is kind of the go-to for the drier style. Riesling was surprisingly good. I tend to stay away from sweet wines, but this is a porch pounder in the summer. Thank you. So obviously some great observations. Also another comment on the Chenin Blanc. 2 Chenin wines couldn't be more different. Interesting, they made from the same grapes, grown on the same vines. And yeah, obviously picking the hand selection that you talked about is super labor intensive. I mean, are all your vines? I mean, you hand pick everything, or do you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things, I mean, with, you know, I think we're small enough to be able to do it, but our big thing is the slopes. So because the vines, you know, when we moved onto the farm, there were vines in the valleys. So down near where my house is here and where our tasting room or our cellar door is. But we've actually pulled all of those out and we've moved everything higher up. So because of the slopes, you couldn't get a machine in if you wanted to. But that, you know, even if we could, we don't want to. We're small enough to be able to hand harvest. So, I mean, our selection, we do, on our reds, we do 3 sortings. And the first sorting is in the vineyard. So when the staff are going through and the team's picking, you know, if they see bunches that are raisined or have a bit of rot or you know, just basically something we don't want, we just drop them on the ground out there. So that by the time we bring stuff into the cellar, it's just the bunches we want. And then in the cellar itself, we do initially we do a bunch sorting on a conveyor belt, and then we individual berry sort on a vibrating sorting table. So it is labor intensive doing sort of stage picks, but yeah, we're small enough to be able to do it. And I think, you know, I think the resultant wines definitely show that we're doing that. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yep, sorry. Whatever I pull off. Yeah, it did. I mean, obviously some people don't realize that the influence on making those selections, you know, in the vineyard can have on the wine, you know, as opposed to just pulling everything in, harvesting by machine and using optical sorters and everything else, the technology that's there now.
Yeah.
The hand touch, the farming aspect of it is often overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, there's obviously, I mean, I've worked, especially where I worked in Oz. I think, you know, Napa and Pomerol are still, a lot of the old world is still all hand done and hand harvested. I mean, but I mean, it was all machine harvested, and we were rescuing mice. You wouldn't believe what we found in the machine harvested bins. But you know, I mean, the winemakers there said, oh, it only makes, you know, maybe a 5% difference in quality, but for us that's big. You know, I mean, it's a huge percentage. You know, we're small, and you know, so yeah. I mean, it is a lot of extra work, but we're able to do it, and I think we're better off for that.
Have you seen, I mean, maybe this is a question for both you and Travis. Have you seen kind of a big uptick in the demand for South African wines with, you know, what's gone on with tariffs and shipping? And I mean, it's been a nightmare for many reasons, the last 2 years. But, you know, just with everything that's gone on, and South African wines seem to have been, certainly in our store, seen an uptick because, you know, we've been bringing more of them in. We have better access to them. And then before that, the tariffs that kind of kicked in with some of the French and Spanish wines as well.
Yeah, I mean, so Travis will answer the second part, I think. But from our side, I think we're lucky to have an importer like Travis. You know, like he mentioned, we were with bigger importers, and you just get lost on a book. And but I think, you know, also you got to get people to taste, you know, the qualities there. I think since '94, when everything kind of opened up, the quality's been improving exponentially each vintage. And so I think the quality's there, and if we can get everyone to taste the wines, you generally you can sell people on them. But it's a case of also just getting them to taste.
So with the first wave of South African wines that hit the US market, we were not in business, but I've spoken with some importers who were importing wine from South Africa there, and they felt like that it was kind of a rush just to get product out into the market. And this was maybe before some of the wineries really understood where the best sites were to grow which grapes, and also weren't as discerning about what they were going to do to themselves in the long term based on what they released to the US market. And so I think that probably set things back a bit. And what we're seeing now is, I think that there's a much more discerning consumer who is experiencing so many different types of wines and looking for value for the money. And so I think what we're seeing is probably going to drive a huge uptick in the next 10 years for South Africa, when that consumer who is now starting to grab South African wines because they're realizing the quality that you can get for your dollar. You know, we have South African wines that are really beautiful red blends, which is a hot category now. And so because of that, it's putting more South African wines in the hands of consumers, not necessarily because the consumer is right now going out and searching for that product. But I think consumers finding a great bottle of wine and then realizing, oh, this is from South Africa, they're then going to go out and directly search for those wines. And so now I think South Africa is probably at the point where they're putting their best foot forward, because you're seeing these beautiful small production wines from family producers hitting the market way more regularly and getting more prominent placements and features. And so, yeah, we are not having any trouble whatsoever selling South Africa. A lot of times it's not sold because it's South Africa, but because we taste it and we said, this is just killer wine for the money, really interestingly made, and made by hand by small producers. And it doesn't hurt when you've got a guy with a South African accent that can come to market and sell it by hand as well.
We'll have to have you hit all the stores on the way to help. The wines themselves, I mean, the raves we've got, the comments we've received thus far, and obviously tasting them as well. You know, like to your point, Travis, they are a great. I mean, they are amazingly priced for what they are, and I think they do a great justice to South African wines and showing what can happen and what they can offer. So, I think we're ready for the next wine.
Well, the Chronicle, great. Thanks, Jeff. So the Chronicle is the next one we're doing. So as I mentioned, these blends began in 2002, and the idea behind this blend was that it was really to showcase the property in its entirety. So to kind of chronicle each vintage. So I use a component from 17 different vineyard blocks. Basically every red vineyard block we have on the property in this wine. There's no recipe to it, so we don't make the same blend each year. We just try and make the best blend we can. So if we have I saw someone question, there was a question about rainfall and things, and we're out of our drought, so we have had two good winters. So that's not an issue now. But if we have a very, in the incredibly dry years, the higher vineyards struggle a lot more than the lower vineyards. So we generally get better quality lower down, and we use more of that in the blend. So it really varies from year to year. The idea is we just want to make the best blend we can each vintage. So the blend on the Chronicle, because it's from all red varietals we grow, it's Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot driven generally. with a little bit of Merlot, and then it's got Pinotage in it, which is the South African varietal, which makes it a Cape blend. So it makes it something unique. And with this one, I basically, same as the Soaring Eagle, but it's a similar blend, but all older vines. So these are between 12 and 30 years old. And because obviously as the vines get older, your yields decline, but your quality and concentration just gets, it gets much better. So this is all older vines. And I vinify everything separately. So we harvest each block. I make it separately, keep it separately in barrel. And then after a year, I make up some sort of mock blends. I usually do between 10 and 15 blends, and we sit down sort of the whole family. So it'll be my mom and dad, my wife, and my brother and his wife. And they all tell me what they like and what they don't like. My wife usually just says she likes all of them, which is great. But I then take their input, I'll tweak it, and we come up with a blend that we all believe sort of chronicles that vintage. And that's where the Chronicle was born. So it's a really, really fun wine to make. Just that you're able to really play. It's like cooking, all these different ingredients and sort of putting them together and seeing what happens. And I think having made the wine since 2002, this is the 20th year. We've got a good idea of what the blend should be based on and how it should work. That's the Chronicle Cape blend.
Chris, this would be a great wine to do a vertical of. Do you hold many of your vintages back? And if so, how much do you have available, and how many different vintages of this wine now do you have, previous vintages?
So we've got all the way back to 2002 to when we started. We've got wines from every vintage. So our big issue now is sort of obviously storage space. But it varies depending on the year. Between 12 bottles and probably 60 bottles is kind of our max. But we use we keep a sort of a variation of that, but we try and keep back vintages. But it is the idea with this is to be able to do back vintages. So it used to be called our estate blend. And then in 2012, we rebranded it to Chronicle. So we've got vintages going back 20 years. So we'll have to, next time you come to visit, we'll have to do a vertical.
I think next time that we all come.
Yes, absolutely. So
back up the bus, rent a plane. I think everybody in all the stores is like giving us a thumb up, like we're all going, we're all coming.
Awesome. So we actually, I saw the stats yesterday that US is they're the sort of biggest tourist component at the moment. So we've had a lot of US visitors, and so if you guys are coming out to visit, we've got some cottages on the farm. You must definitely come and say hi.
Wildlife as well.
Yes, yeah. So we've got some zebras and some wildebeest or canoe, springbok, and then nyalas. So we've got some wildlife. Where these lower vineyards in the valleys used to be, we've actually brought wildlife that used to be indigenous, but obviously when all the farms developed and it all sort of got chased out, we've brought some back. But it is fenced off because otherwise they eat the vines. So we do have some wildlife on the farm.
All right. So somebody asked what the vintage of the Chronicle was. I'll have to look. I can't remember.
I think you guys will have, I think it will probably be the 18, but I'm speaking under correction.
I think
could be the 19.
Travis might know. Travis is on mute.
Should be the 2018.
2018, yes.
Sometimes when we do these, sometimes we end up with split vintages for different things, but I think we're good. All right, so go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I think I'm sure you guys will be on the 18 because I don't think we've actually sent 19, so should be good.
So let's move on to the next one. And she's
great. So the Vantage Pinotage. So we are the Vantage is a single vineyard. same as the Honeybunch and the basically the Riesling. We do the Vantage, and it's Pinotage, which is kind of the South African varietal. It's a crossing between Pinot Noir and Cinsault, and it was crossed in the 1920s at just down the road here at Stellenbosch University. And there was a lot of Cinsault planted in South Africa, and no one's really sure, but the Professor Perald, who actually did the crossing, he did a flower crossing. We think he was trying to get kind of some of the savory elements of Pinot Noir and that lightness and elegance into Cinsault, which is really juicy and sort of not overly heavy, but a slightly juicier sort of fresh fruited wine. And he crossed it. It was planted. The first commercial Pinotages were only really made in the 1950s, so early 1950s. So as far as varieties on an international scale go, it's very young. I mean, it's only been made for 60, 70 years commercially. So it's a variety that's, I think, taken a long time to kind of figure out. It's quite alternative and incredibly unique. And it's something I love to work with. I often see Pinotage here. I find it very similar to what Zinfandel is in California, where you get people that love it and then you get people that really don't. So I think it's a fun wine to make. It's the uniquely South African wine. It's our first grapes we harvest. So we've actually finished harvesting all of our Pinotage for 2022. And I've still got 2 tanks fermenting, but 2 tanks are already done ferment. We've pressed them and they're in barrel already. So because it ripens very early, we have to harvest it basically, before everything else. It needs to ripen quite quickly. And we find that by growing it as bush vines, so it's not trellised up onto a wire, it's grown as a bush on the ground. We literally take the vine sticks, stick them in the ground and let them grow. The grapes basically ripen much closer to the soil. So where on trellised vines, you've got a lot of airflow under the canopy, because you've got that gap between the soil and where the vine or the sort of the bearing part of the vine starts. Because on the Pinotage, the bunches stay close to the ground. You've got the ground that sort of warms up in the day and then radiates heat at night. It keeps the bunches warm and accelerates that ripening process. And then that combined with bush vines naturally limiting the yield of the vines, you're not able to basically get big yields of bush vines. It just doesn't work. That all contributes to ripening better and quicker, and we feel gives us a better resultant block. And the Vantage or resultant wine, the Vantage block is on a ridge running up to our top vineyards, also south facing, and it overlooks Stellenbosch. So we always go up to this block for sundowners in the evenings. Not always. When we do sundowners, we go up there, and it's just a beautiful vantage point. You overlook False Bay, so you can see the sea in the distance and Stellenbosch below, and then Table Mountain, off to the one side. So it's an awesome site, and I think we get a sort of a fresher, lighter style of Pinotage. Traditionally Pinotage was made in a very big, extracted, heavy style. I like to think that this is a little more fresh fruited. It's still a weighty wine, but there's the fresh fruit, but with that nice savory, the Pinot Noir influence sort of coming through. So you can sort of see the parents, being Cinsault and Pinot Noir in the wine itself. But that's the Vantage. I hope you guys enjoy it. Also 24 months in barrel, 30% new, and all French oak.
One of the interesting things, you talked about a little bit about this being a crossing between Pinot Noir and Cinsault. It's one of the few, I think, actual crossings that is commercially successful, right? There's in America, I would say there's a lot of them out there that are trying to be.
Yeah.
People don't understand that a lot of the vines or wine, a lot of the vines that are out there, Pinot Noir, it's a mutation of multiple generations of parents, and that now has hundreds of different clones variations of it itself.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and Pinotage has had sort of an interesting life, I would say, when it comes to the consumer misunderstanding, because a little bit of what Travis talked about of people rushing to get wine that didn't necessarily meet the standards of what the consumer was expecting. And people are now kind of coming to it with a second light and seeing well-made Pinotage and what it can be, which this is. We've got a couple of great comments already about this being a couple of their favorites. And so, I think if you tried Pinotage 8 years ago, 9, 10 years ago, that maybe wouldn't be the sentiment, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. I mean, I think Pinotage got such a bad reputation when it first got sent out. I mean, I think one of the things with Pinotage, I think what makes it challenging is a variety, and as it being the South African varietal, I don't know if it'll ever be the go-to wine, just because it's not easy to find good ones, and because it's an early ripener, it's not a varietal you can mass produce. So you can't. It's not like like Malbec in Argentina or Sauvignon Blanc in New Zealand, where you can produce tons and tons of the stuff and it's all a decent quality. You can't do that with Pinotage. You have to limit the yield. It does do better as bush vines, which a lot of producers don't want to work with because it's very labor intensive. And so it is a challenge to make, but I do think that it's getting better and better. I think initially in the 90s it really got a reputation for being bitter, a lot of that burnt rubber character, that a lot of people talked about. And I think by working with the vineyards and being more vineyard focused, we've been able to sort of lift the quality of the wines. But and then Pinotage, there's definitely a wildness to it. I think there is an Africanness to the wine. So we often pair this with venison, or lamb. We eat a lot of game meats in South Africa, and Pinotage is definitely a favorite. It can stand up to sort of more flavorful and intense dishes as well.
What was the phrase you used when you're talking about watching the sunset?
Sundowners.
Sundowners. Yeah. Okay. Do you guys talk about sundowners, eh?
Sunset.
Sunset. Okay. So sundowners is just if we going, it's basically if we go and watch the sunset with a glass of wine, that's having a sundowner. So
like it. Sundowner with my porch pounder.
Yeah. Cool. Should I how are we on time? Should I start with the last wine?
I think we should start the last wine. Yep. It'll allow time to take that. And then, if we go a little bit long, it's fine, but I think go ahead and let's start the last one. Okay.
Yeah, there's a bit of a story behind this one, so I'll start talking about it. But so the last wine is kind of where we began as a property. My dad, as I mentioned earlier, he said that the right bank of Bordeaux is what got him into wine. He said that was his wow wine was actually a wine from Pomerol, and it's so Merlot driven blends, not always obviously from the right bank, often Cab Franc driven, but he loved the Merlot and the Merlot driven blends from that area. And looking for properties to make wine, that was obviously a big factor, does it make good Bordeaux blends? And so that's where the Sir Thomas Cullinan, this last wine, began. And in the 90s, my dad always put 15% Cabernet Sauvignon with the Merlot and called it a varietal Merlot. So you're allowed to do that in South Africa. You're allowed to, I think in the US as well, you're allowed to add 15% of another varietal and still call it the majority varietal. So I believe that's a blend. So in 2010, when we began the Honeybunch, that's when we started with the Sir Thomas Cullinan. So it's a Merlot-driven blend with a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon. So it's from our top rows of our top blocks, and it's where it really gets steep. So the rows are actually terraced, so they stepped. So you get the vines just are more exposed. They dry out a lot quicker. the vines struggle more. And with vineyards, the more they struggle, obviously to a point, you don't want them to struggle too much, but the more they struggle, the more concentration and intensity you get. So we get these very small bunches, very small berries from the top rows of this Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot vineyard that are next to each other. And then, so I harvest those separately. Because they're small volumes, I fermented all in 500-liter open top barrels. So it's not fermented in big tanks, it's fermented in barrels. And yeah, basically I ferment it, we press it off, it goes to 80% new French oak for 24 months. And it's a very site-specific, just a couple of rows of Cab and a couple of rows of Merlot right at the top of the farm. It's actually just next to that Riesling vineyard. So over 1,000 feet and faces south. So also every afternoon, because of its exposure and how high it is, it gets a lot of wind as well. So when the bunches are in flower, you know, with the wind actually causes very bad set. So it means we get these very loose bunches. So there's sort of like a couple of berries around this bunch. So it looks a bit sort of sparse, but you get the berries that are there just develop this incredible flavor and intensity. So we harvest that separately, and that becomes the Sir Thomas Cullinan. And he was the name is it's named after mine and my brother's great grandfather, my dad's great grandfather. And he came to South Africa with his parents from Ireland, and his dad actually started a transport company. So the company was transporting goods up and down the coast, but obviously on ox wagons. And on one of the trips, his dad passed away, and he wasn't interested in actually taking over the family business. So he followed the diamond and gold rushes, kind of got everywhere too late, but ended up settling in Johannesburg, which is where my family is originally from. And he had a sort of a passion for, you know, geology and semi-precious stones and stuff. So he would sort of go out on weekends and collect them, polish them up, and then sell them. And he found this volcanic chute just outside Johannesburg where he thought he might find diamonds. And he ended up buying the small holding. He started mining it. And then in 1903, he found the biggest uncut diamond that had ever been found at the time. So it was just over 3,000 carats. So it's not the biggest anymore, but it's still the most valuable in terms of clarity and color. And South Africa was in the process of gaining our independence from the UK or from Britain. And it was such a unique find that, as sort of like a parting gift to the British, it was the king then, but the British royal family, the Transvaal government asked him if he would give the diamond to them to say thank you for our independence. So he did, and that's why he was knighted. And they then cut it into a lot of different stones, but two main stones. And the biggest stone is now in the scepter of the British crown jewels. And then the next stone is the main diamond in the crown of the crown jewels, and they're called the Greater and the Lesser Star of Africa. So it's a little bit of our family history and kind of where we started, but he did give the diamond away. So it's not how we got a wine farm. I think we would have, if he had kept it, we would have a much smarter seller, but it's a bit of our family history. So we gave his name to the wine, and this is our sort of our signature red. So I hope you guys enjoy it.
That's a great story, Chris.
Cool.
Recommendations for aging on this and for pairing. I know when it's been a while since you've been in town and we feel like breaking out, doing a braai at our house and pulling one of your bigger wines for a nice dinner, this is the one that we go to. But what do you guys drink it with over there? When do you pull out a bottle of the Sir Thomas?
So I think not often enough, but I think I'm lucky to be, with this wine, it is one we keep back. So I think you guys are on this 2016 vintage because we make so little. So we're able to release it when we feel it's drinking better. but sorry, I just saw the question. Can I pronounce Remhoogte slowly? I'll do that shortly. But it's definitely an occasion wine. I mean, I think I probably open it. Yeah, I mean, the tasting room opens it every day for tastings. So generally, if there's a bottle open at the end of the day, and they've it's on its second day, I'll take it home. But in terms of pairing, I really like it with on its own, because it's already aged a little bit. It just decants it and have it on its own. But with more neutral dishes, where the Pinotage and Chronicle are a little bit more wild, they're a bit more intense. I think you can go with like curries and richer dishes. I think the Sir Thomas, I prefer it with something more neutral. So like maybe a nice fillet, or or even on its own. But I think that's when I don't think I answered when I would open it, but as often as possible, but not too often, because we don't have a lot of it. But and then to pronounce Remhoogte slowly, so we just say, so Rem is just REM, how you would say that normally, and then we just say the G like a K, so it's Hoogte. So if you say Remhoogte, then everyone will know what you're talking about here. So obviously in Dutch, it's a lot more guttural. The G is like a, so right from the back of the throat. So it's Remhoogte. But if you say Remhoogte, everyone will know what you're talking about here in South Africa. So just say the G like a K. I hope that answers the question.
I tried to find, like, as we were playing it, I was trying to find a bunch of videos on how to pronounce it. And there was a bunch of tastings that you had done, but you boom, you say it so quickly, it's hard to pick it up. And quite honestly, that's why I wanted Travis to introduce you, because I hadn't practiced enough that I didn't want to get it completely wrong. So that's definitely a great question from Andrea in Cedar Rapids, or whoever else is in Cedar Rapids with them. So, well, I want to say, obviously this is an amazing tasting. The wines themselves are just spectacular. And I want to thank you as well as Travis. I know it's a big feat for you to get up at 2 a.m, especially in the middle of harvest. You have a busy time. We appreciate learning more about your story, about the story of the winery and your family, and you telling us all the little tidbits of what goes in to make these wines so wonderful. I mean, it's quite amazing. I want to thank Travis, obviously, for making this happen. I know logistically, with everything going on with shipping and the challenges of distributors, and even getting things in a truck sometimes to get them to a state is a burden anymore. Just the work that you've done to help make this and everything else possible that we work with you on. So thank you very much for that. Any parting words for us?
We appreciate you guys.
No worries. I put you on this. I put you on the spot. I should have warned you.
No, I was enjoying listening to you talk. Yeah, I mean, thanks so much, guys. Yeah, Travis for organizing. Just a privilege to work with you guys, and Jeff, and and the WineStyles team. I really appreciate the support, and thank you for putting this all together. And I look forward to seeing you guys in person soon. Yep, as long as South Africa doesn't come up with any new COVID variants, I think I should be able to come over and visit, or you guys can come and visit. Yeah, we'd love to have you here on the farm.
Absolutely. With that, I will part ways. I know, just so everybody knows, we are still trying to work on our March spotlight. There has been some logistical challenges with that one. We're still hoping to get something announced very soon. But the other one that we do have announced, that it should be live on everybody's website, and some emails starting to go out, is we're going to have Michael Mandavi with Charles Krug tell us their family story, nuts and bolts, and obviously taste their wines in April. So look for that date, as well as the education classes we have coming up. And then just obviously visit your local store, buy these wines, taste them, try them. I know most of the wines, I know a lot of the WineStyles plans to have these in stock for quite some time, as well as putting them on the buy the glass for the next month or so. So again, thank you everybody for joining, and we will sign off with that.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, everybody. Bye, Chris.
Thank you, guys.